And now we will begin our featured luncheon keynote. Dr. Patrick Phillips, the author of Blood at the Root, A Racial Cleansing in America, author Patrick Phillips will discuss his search for the truth about his own hometown, where in 1912, hundreds of local white people used arson, lynching, and mob violence to drive out the entire black population and then kept them out for nearly a century. Having been raised in America's most notorious white county, Phillips will talk about his awakening from the willful ignorance of white supremacy and how he joined the struggle for racial justice. For the second part of this presentation, Japannah Kellogg, director of the ISCORE office, will join author Patrick Phillips on stage for a conversation about blood at the root and lessons learned as a result of Jim Crow and the impact of reading this book. Japannah will discuss his familial ties to this history and the impact it has had on him as a reader and relative. Dr. Ashley Guerin will be moderating this conversation. Please welcome Patrick Phillips to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? How's the conference going? It's been amazing to be here. I'm an outlier. This is my first time at ISCORE. I'm hearing about all of this for the first time, and I just want to say, I've said this since yesterday. You know, I've taught at a lot of different universities. I teach at Stanford now, and I have a lot to tell them about what I saw here. You guys are on the absolute cutting edge, leading the way. This is not going on any of the other campuses I've ever been around, so I'm just impressed, and kudos to everyone. Yeah. I'm delighted to be here for a conversation with Ashley Guerin and Japannah Kellogg. And you all know Japannah as the leader of this conference, but I know him in a much more personal way as a member of the Kellogg family that's really at the heart of my book, Blood at the Root, and someone who is a direct living link to the events that I wrote about and to a black community whose forgotten story of resilience and perseverance I was determined to recover. So while I've done a lot of campus talks over the years, this one is truly like no other event I've ever done, since I have a chance to speak with the great-great-great-grandson of Joseph and Eliza Kellogg, who were among the most prominent black citizens in my hometown in the 19th century and the owners of a prosperous 200-acre farm. And I'm going to tell you more about their farm later. I've been researching and writing about these two for a very long time. So for me, this event has some of the excitement and anticipation of a family reunion. Before we start our conversation, I've been asked to say a little bit about my own journey to writing the book. I was first motivated by a desire to learn the truth about a kind of ghost story that I had always been told as a child. My parents had moved from Atlanta, Georgia, to a place in the Georgia foothills called Forsyth County in 1976. And when I was in the second grade, and soon after we got there, I noticed something strange about our new home. There were no people of color anywhere, and everyone I met, children and adults, used the N-word almost exclusively when referring to African Americans. It was one slur or racist joke after another in Forsyth County, and when I asked everyone why they hated black people so much, kids on the school bus told me a story that they'd heard from their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. A long, long time ago, the story went, a white girl was raped and killed by young black men. And after her body was found, whites ran out all the black people in Forsyth and warned them to never come back. This, I was told, was why Forsyth was still all white in the 1970s and 80s, and why, at least according to my classmates, it always would be. In January of 1987, when I was 16, the whole world learned that there was this place in Georgia where segregation was alive and well, where white people still lived as if there'd been no Brown versus Board of Education, no Selma March, no Montgomery bus boycott. 87 was the year when my family took part in the first civil rights movement that anyone had ever seen in Forsyth County, which was meant to protest the county's violently enforced racial ban, which had been in place for more than 75 years. But before the demonstration even started, an angry mob of whites surrounded the line of peace marchers, which was made up of African-American activists and a small handful of locals that included my mother, my father, and my sister. This angry mob pelted the demonstrators with rocks and bottles and bricks. And eventually, the first Brotherhood March had to be halted because of fears that someone would be shot by armed men in the crowd. And I'm going to play just a brief news clip that'll give you a sense of what this day was like. And it contains some hateful language. I've muted that part, but you will probably still understand what the crowd was chanting.
What started out today as a Brotherhood March through an all-white county in Georgia ended in a violent confrontation with the Ku Klux Klan. The march was organized in honor of Martin Luther King's birthday. NBC's Kenley Jones reports tonight that it recalled some early setbacks in the civil rights struggle.
Ain't only no black. Send them home.
It was supposed to be a walk for brotherhood, to show that Forsyth County, Georgia, which drove blacks from its borders in 1912, would welcome them back today.
We haven't had none up here since the first of the century, and I don't think we've done okay without them, and I don't believe we need them up here now.
Atlanta City Councilman Hosea Williams, a veteran of the civil rights movement, had come to lead the march at the request of a small number of whites who organized it.
Well, this is as bad as I've seen it in the Mississippi or any other place. This is as bad as it is in South Africa.
Williams and other marchers, outnumbered 2 to 1 by Ku Klux Klan members and their sympathizers, were pelted with rocks, bottles, and mud clods. No serious injuries were reported, but law enforcement officers, who made 10 arrests, finally halted the march.
Right at the last minute, they got out of hand. We couldn't guarantee security for anyone anymore.
Georgia Governor Joe Frank Harris is reportedly furious that state and local officers could not control the crowd. After the marchers left, the Klan held a rally at the courthouse in Cumming, the county seat.
God bless America. Keep Forsyth County white.
So I was 16 that year, and like a typical teenager, I arrived late to meet my parents for the march. But as a result, I got a unique perspective on that day, because when I finally got to the town square, I found myself shoulder to shoulder with dozens of other young men walking to the courthouse. And when one of them held up a piece of rope tied into a thick noose, I realized that I was not at a peace rally at all, and had instead stumbled my way into the very heart of the Ku Klux Klan's victory celebration. The Reverend Hosea Williams, who had led the Selma March in 1965, found himself facing exactly the same kind of seething white mob 22 years later in Forsyth County. And afterwards, he told reporters that Forsyth was, quote, a South Africa in the backyard of Atlanta. Congressman John Lewis denounced Forsyth as one of those pockets of hatred the civil rights movement passed over. And when Oprah Winfrey came and filmed an episode of her brand new talk show on the town square, my home became known as a last bastion of Jim Crow segregation and the most racist place in America. For a long time, my reaction to growing up in such a place was to stick my head in the sand. I tried to avoid all conversations about race, since people who look like me so often got it terribly wrong. When it came time for college, I went to school in the North, and I basically tried to leave Forsyth County and all the bigots and racists of my childhood as far behind as I possibly could. But then about a decade ago, I had a conversation with a friend that radically changed my relationship to social justice and to the place I come from. My friend Natasha Trethewey is also a Southerner and also a writer, but she's a woman of color who went to the University of Georgia, and so she had been warned many times to never ever drive through the dangerous white county of Forsyth. When Natasha learned that I'd grown up there, she was amazed and troubled that I had never once mentioned it. As the daughter of a white father and a black mother, Natasha herself had written about America's fraught racial history many times. And one night she asked me a really startling question. Why was it that she wrote so often about blackness, yet I, a white man from Georgia and from one of the most notorious sundown towns in America, never said a word about whiteness? Why, Natasha asked me, do you think race is only a subject for black writers? Why do you think you're not involved? That moment really changed my life. And it sent me on a search for the truth about that old ghost story that I had always heard on the school bus and the playground when I was a kid. To find out what really happened, I began searching in old newspapers, and I went in digital archives and I searched for Forsyth County in 1912. And up came a list of headlines that, sure enough, told of an 18-year-old woman named May Crow who was raped and killed near the banks of the Chattahoochee River, allegedly by 3 young black men. I clicked a link to an issue of the Atlanta Constitution from 1912, and when it filled the screen, I just stared in wonder. These were the first faces of Black Forsyth I had ever seen. And as I zoomed in on the photograph, I knew that it raised many more questions than it answered. If 2 of those faces belonged to the teenage boys doomed to, quote, swing for their crime, which 2? And if they were accused of raping and killing May Crow, who were the others? Was it really true, as the headline said, that the woman prisoner helped fasten the noose around her own brother's neck? All my life, I'd wondered whether African Americans had ever really lived in the notorious white county of Forsyth, but now I was face to face with the truth, or at least something closer to it than I ever thought I'd get. The image made me realize that the story I'd grown up hearing as a kid was riddled with lies and it was distorted by bigotry, but at heart, it was no myth. There was this terrible reality. As I dug deeper, I learned that the arrest of these 6 people was the first act in a season of white hysteria and racial terror that would lead not only to the lynching of a man named Rob Edwards and the hanging of 2 teenage boys. This is Oscar Daniel, who was 18, and his cousin Ernest Knox, who was 16. But it would lead also eventually to the expulsion of every single African-American resident of the county, including Japannah's ancestors, Joseph and Eliza. This is a grainy image, but this is the other image of Joseph and Eliza, who through 50 years of savings, shrewd business dealings, and backbreaking labor had built a prosperous 200-acre farm in the same place where they themselves had once been enslaved. The more I read in the historical records, the more I began to understand how the old story I'd been told, stripped of names and dates and places, had always made my home's communal crime seem like only a legend, rather than what it was, a deliberate and sustained campaign of terror waged by ordinary white people against their own black neighbors. And I just want to say, since writing the book, I've been engaged in further research, and one of the things I'm doing is using geospatial mapping tools to really try to recover and reverse that erasure of the black community in Forsyth County. So this is just an example of some of what's become possible with that technology. I've been mapping land lot numbers from the courthouse onto a map of the county, and you can overlay that. These red dots represent the Kellogg farm as it was in 1912. And you can overlay that with the present day Forsyth County, which has now become a very, very prosperous place, one of the top 25 wealthiest counties in America, and a real boom town in the Atlanta suburbs. And just as one more example, one of those lots is lot 1059, and on that land today is a gated community called the Highlands at Sawnee. And this is a picture of it from Google Maps. And what you see is Joseph and Eliza's old pasture, which has now been built up with 300 homes with an average value of about $500,000 each. So just to bring home the stakes in all of this, when I do this for all of the properties that Joseph Kellogg was forced to sell in 2014 for $2,400, they've generated a white suburban wealth in the neighborhood of about $800 million today. So Blood at the Root grew out of my first glimpse at that newspaper headline. And in the years since I first saw it, I've tried to find every scrap of information I could about the purge. I poured through newspapers and transcribed records in the courthouse basement and began to locate and interview descendants of the Forsyth refugees, including some of Japannah's relatives, adding their stories to the mountain of evidence showing not just that these crimes occurred, but where, how, by whom, and to whom. This is just one more photograph of the Brown family, another of the families who were forced to flee in 1912. I am eager to get to our conversation. So I just wanted to end by stressing how much the present kept echoing the past as I was working on this book. And how much America's history of racial violence refused to stay contained in that past. As I was researching the lynching of Rob Edwards, whose friends called him Big Rob, I watched on CNN as people in Ferguson, Missouri wept over the killing of their friend, Michael Big Mike Brown. As I was learning about how the mobs targeted black churches, I watched news coverage of Dylan Roof's killing spree at Mother Emanuel in Charleston in 2015. And as I wrote about the torch-wielding night riders of Forsyth in 1912, I was confronted by images of the new torch-wielding white supremacists of Charlottesville in 2017. All of this brought home to me that even as we make progress on racial justice, at the same time and often in the same places, the forces of bigotry and white supremacy are also at work. I was raised on a hopeful narrative of progress by my white liberal parents, who came out of the civil rights movement convinced that with each day, America would inevitably grow a little more just, and that with each new victory, the gains of Dr. King's movement would be locked in place. But what I saw as I worked on the book was that none of those gains are guaranteed, and none of the progress we hope to make will happen automatically. I realized that if white people of goodwill sit by in silence, as I did growing up, the forces of intolerance reign unchecked, and their lies and distortions go unanswered. That's exactly how it worked in Forsyth, and I see now belatedly that the indifference and apathy of people like myself was a huge part of the problem, and key to perpetuating the ban for nearly a century. The racists in Forsyth County were more than happy to interpret the silence of bystanders as consent and to view inaction as tacit agreement. So it has been one of the great honors of my life to break that self-serving and dangerous white silence that I grew up with, and to finally become what one of my detractors recently called a traitor to my race. I have never been prouder than when I read that in a piece of hate mail. And I have never felt more involved in the struggle to dismantle white supremacy, as my friend Natasha urged me to do long ago. I have found a lot of other reasons to be hopeful, like when in 2020, Forsyth County held a soil collection ceremony that memorialized the lynching of Rob Edwards. These two are grandsons of Rosalie Brown, who's second from the left in that photograph. Or when they erected a marker telling the story of Forsyth's original black community and the lynching of Rob Edwards. And they've also recently been restoring a black cemetery in downtown Cumming. I'm really delighted that my involvement has also brought me to Iowa State and to ISCORE, and that I get to be part of this conversation with Japannah and Ashley. I know it has taken courage for Japannah to come out from behind the director's desk to talk about his own family history and his own story, and I just feel incredibly lucky to be up here with him today. So thank you all very much for listening.
I want to take a moment and thank you for attending today's Thomas L. Hill, Iowa State's Conference on Race and Ethnicity. I want to take a moment and thank you for attending today's Thomas L. Hill, Iowa State's Conference on Race and Ethnicity. My name is Japannah Joseph Kellogg, Jr., and I'm proud to say that I've had the opportunity of leading this project for a number of years. When I talk about the ISCORE experience, I often tell people that it's meaning-making around the topic of race, ethnicity, and equality. But when it comes to talking about Iowa State's conference, I really want to say that it's community building. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different people from across the campus, bringing this event to you each year. You've had over 40 different presentations to choose from, but at the core of that experience are our students. Each year, I take a group of students to the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. I ask those students to be vulnerable, trusting, and curious. At this point in time, this year, this is very unique for me because I'm going on a journey, and I'm asking you to be a part of that. I was born and raised in Galveston, Texas, to a single mom. I consider Galveston home. But I was fortunate to spend time with another set of siblings in Florida, where my father's from. The journey and our discussion are connected to the book, Blood at the Root, by Dr. Patrick Phillips, who you just heard from. Before I join Dr. Phillips on stage, I would like to play a clip from the book. Please note the clip contains a violent scene.
There are few written records of the slave patrols and none at all documenting the groups that once operated in Forsyth. So most of what is known comes from oral histories, like the stories told by a man named Edward Glenn, who was a slave on the Clinton Brown plantation near Oscarville in the 1850s. In 1937, Glenn recalled those days and confirmed that the patrol system was in full force in antebellum Forsyth. When a runaway slave was caught outside the Brown plantation, Glenn said, "They was punished. I saw a woman stripped naked, laid over a stump in a field with her head hanging down on one side, her feet on the other, and tied to the stump. They whipped her hard, and you could hear her hollering far off." Glenn described how white patrollers also used the gammon stick, a punishment in which the slave's arms were bound around the bent knees and fastened to a stick run beneath them. This was also called the Spanish buck. They stripped the slave, who was unable to stand up, and rolled him on one side and whipped him till the blood came. As William McWhorter, a slave in nearby Clark County, put it, "Paddy rollers was the devil's own hosses. If they cotched him out and his master hadn't fixed him up with a pass, it was just too bad. They most killed him." Such scenes are also common in the stories passed down through families forced out of Forsyth. One comes from Anthony Neal, whose ancestors Joseph and Eliza Kellogg became the county's largest black property owners in the 1880s, although they'd begun their lives as slaves. Eliza made repeated attempts to escape during slave times, Neal says, and by the time the Confederate Army surrendered in 1865 and the slaves of Georgia were finally free, Eliza had run off yet again. According to family lore, before she could be told she was free, Eliza Kellogg first had to be coaxed out of hiding from the paddy rollers.
Wow. Can you hear me? So, first of all, I've had it easy. I've asked our students to share. I've asked various keynotes to share, and I haven't had to share. And so I have to tell you a few things before we get into the discussion. But more importantly, as I was struggling to figure out if this would be a moment with people I work with, I turned to Ashley and she told me, "Get over yourself." And that was helpful because sometimes we need an outside voice to balance the inside voice. So as I try to put some pieces together and allow you all to hear from me in probably in a different way, I just ask for grace and understanding. Okay. So on the video, I say something about, and I think we have some slides, Casey. A PowerPoint. So go back. Well, that actually be fine. So I grew up in Galveston, Texas. And that's where I'll try to explain or describe or put some words to a common phrase called Jim Crow. And it may not be something that you're familiar with, but if you're from the South, you've lived it. If you're from the North, you may have read about it. But I have to start with this because to the far right of the screen, you know, that's my father. That's a young man. That's a young man. And the history for him is he grew up in Florida, and he was a fisherman. That's what brought him to Galveston. That's how my mother and my father met. And people say, how could one person look that much like two people? So when you see the picture of my mother, you're like, okay. But for the most part, as I look at the picture, they describe different moments. They describe different moments in time. And so in the middle is my Aunt Gloria, and she's a connector to me and Patrick. He's had many a conversations with her. Now this last picture, and I'll come back to that bottom picture, but this last picture was taken probably about maybe sometime last year. He still uses his boat. He goes out and complains about the price of seafood and what he's getting paid for, and he's somewhat retired, but that keeps him busy. The picture at the bottom, or I used to visit Florida, so those are my siblings through my dad. And so I can't say there's been a time that I wasn't welcome. Actually, there was one moment, and I'll share this. We had just had breakfast, and I want to really focus on my time in Texas, but we just had breakfast, and so as soon as we got done, I got up to wash the dishes. And he said, come on outside, that's woman's work. I'm like, dude, you gonna get me killed, because this wasn't something that's gonna fly at home. But as I close out on the part about the connector, I'm Japannah Joseph Kellogg Jr. Most people don't know my name is Joseph. I'm a junior. I have, there's the third, you know, and my son. But when I think about my father, I love him. He's a complex man. And as I get older, I realize he lived a complex life. So his complexity probably was key to his survival. So there's another slide. Now that's her. That was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And like most CEOs, you don't even know what they're thinking because the rest of the family carries it out. So, but when I say a single mom, I have to describe there's 7 years between brother above me and 7 years below. And my older sibling's father died, and my mom and my father were never married, but my mother insists that I had a relationship with my father. It was important, you know. She would send me, I remember my first plane ride by myself, had the tag on my shirt and made sure I got there. So, you know, I always knew where he was. So it wasn't like I don't have a father, but my mother was my mother and my father. And so when I say that there was 7 years on one end and 7 years on the other end, when I say single mom, I'm like, I had her to myself. Like, she was mine. I would go anywhere, we would be in the car, and I vividly, and honestly, building to this day, it's allowed me to reflect and think through some things. I remember the first day of school, very first day of school, we're in this large auditorium, and, you know, I'm sitting there with her, and they're doing the orientation, and then they take me to this room, and then she leaves. I lose my mind. She had to come back and get me. My first day wasn't my first day. My second day is my first day. But I'm like, no, we go together. And so I say that with great pride because when we start talking a little bit about Jim Crow, I honestly was searching for things that I could say, oh, and this, and then I thought I was protected from Jim Crow. That was really the job that she did. It came through a lot of no's, you can't go. It came through a lot of, so who's gonna be there? It showed up in a lot of different ways. And then when I read this book, and actually we will get to the questions, I could resonate with when she said, when Patrick said those young men were 14 and 16 and they were kids. And I realized that's what those no's were about. It was a protector. So.
Japannah kind of answered our first question already, so. All right, so thank you, Patrick and Japannah, for sharing your histories and your work. I just want to say, Patrick, I'm honored to meet you in person. After listening to your Audible for many, many hours, I feel like I already know you. It was really cool to see the person and the voice at the same time. So I have known Japannah since I was 18 years old as a freshman at Iowa State University, as a member of the Student Support Services program that he was the former director, or he is the former director of. So as you all know, Japannah loves to talk. And I've talked with Japannah for many, many hours as well of my life. But I'm really interested in hearing this part of his life and history. And so I hope that through this conversation today, we can hear about this history in this amazing book. So for both of you, this book has brought the two of you together from different roles. Patrick as a former resident of Forsyth County and now scholar, and Japannah as a descendant of individuals that Patrick has researched and uncovered an unfortunate history about. Before we get into how you all met, I'd like to dig a little bit more into your upbringings as men who grew up in the South and are relatively of the same age. So Japannah, if you can talk a little bit more about what you shared, just kind of how you were shaped by both the political and social climate of the South, or are there any events that stuck out that had an impact on your upbringing?
Well, as I said, I spent a lot of time with my mother, and just had her to myself. She was a domestic worker, and I would say, after reading this book, it still comes to a close second as the most profound book I read. My most profound book I read was Richard Wright's Black Boy. And it really introduced me to, and it had to probably at the stage of life, because I'm like, oh, wow, how could this be common in Texas? And that's when I was introduced to just some things. And so I would say, to answer the question, that knowing that my mom was a domestic worker, she cleaned homes, you know. And I remember the stories, I remember the conversations, I remember the fact that the day I didn't go to school, I had to go to work with her and sit in the kitchen and be quiet. Okay, and she worked for this lady named Miss Parasina. And I still know where the house is and whatnot. And Miss Parasina was very meticulous about how her house needed to be clean. And to the point that she insisted that her toilet was clean with a toothbrush. And as I think about those things, I'm thinking, that's how I could have a protective. I could have what I needed, and she has a policy or a slogan or a catchphrase or just the law. She said, I'll give you all your needs and some of your wants. She said, if you get everything you want, that's not gonna work for you. She said, if I had $1 million, I'm gonna give you all your needs and some of your wants, because you didn't ask to come here. And so, yes, so hopefully I got close.
Sure. No, that was good. So Patrick, in your book and this afternoon, you've kind of talked about what it was like being a kid in Forsyth County and how your family didn't always fit in or really align with those values of that community. How would you describe your experiences as a white man growing up in the South, especially in Forsyth County, and the role of your upbringing in shaping your perspective and values? And when would you kind of say your activism and role as an ally advocate started? I know you explained a little bit, but even as a child, maybe how that fit in.
Am I on? You guys can hear me? Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I've already talked a little bit about what it was like growing up in Forsyth County. I mean, I guess the only thing I would really add is that, there's a lot of talk about the way we don't kind of begin this work out of nothing. My parents, I'm also standing on the shoulders of my parents. My father's a Methodist minister. My parents are both from Birmingham, Alabama, and they were high schoolers in the 50s. My mom was a young mother in the early 60s, so they lived through Bull Connors, Birmingham. So people who know that history, they came from a place that had already been ripped apart over race. They fell out with their parents. So all four of my grandparents are people I loved intensely. They were all four bigots, used horrible language. They were racist, segregationists. So I think maybe one of the experiences I had growing up in the South was I never knew not being in that complex position of loving people who use that kind of language, who saw the world that way. So I love Forsyth County. They don't believe that, but that's home. It's still home. I love it there. I want it to be better, So I guess I think there is a paradoxical kind of conflicted experience that was part of my growing up from the beginning because of Birmingham. And we didn't fit in Forsyth because my parents had been in Atlanta during my dad was in seminary at Emory and had met Dr. King and was around a very lively, sort of intense, active time in Atlanta. And we didn't fit in, but we had the privilege of just staying quiet sometimes. So that too, I don't look back on any of that with pride, that at home we denounced everything around us, and out in the world we were quieter about it. And that's shameful to me until '87. But when Oprah was in Forsyth County, one of the things she said was she was in Forsyth County for 24 hours and she got a read on the place in one day. She said, a lot of white people in this community are afraid of other white people. And that was exactly the experience. So, yeah. And I talked a little bit about the conversation with Natasha, and I'm not sure she remembers it as a monumentally important moment because she had that conversation with a lot of the white writers she knew, but it was monumentally important to me.
Thank you. So obviously the plight of African Americans in the United States is very emotional and difficult to learn about, especially as someone who may identify as Black or African American. Japannah, could you tell us maybe what it has been like to learn about this piece of African American history that directly links to your ancestors and your family who was from Forsyth County?
Sure. So this is the book. And I think that when I would talk to my father, he would tell a story. And he was, and for the most part, the curiosity usually comes with the first name, Japannah. Where'd it come from? And it's a family name. It was actually from my grandmother's side, his mom, but the Joseph Kellogg. But anyway, he would talk to me about where we were from Georgia. We would run out of Georgia, and I'm like, oh yeah. Did you watch a movie? Like literally, I just I didn't dismiss it. I just, yeah. And so lost an uncle due to COVID, and I could tell now that was my my father's. That was his person, because the 6 o'clock calls that he used to get, I get them. So, but. I take advantage of having that conversation because I'm curious, and but I bought the book. I thought I read the book. I didn't realize I didn't read the book until we started thinking about this, and I think my wife reads all the time. She reads everything, and I'm like, and so she sees me. Oh, okay, and then afterwards she said, "How's that book coming?" I'm like, "Huh? What?" And I put it down. But I know why I put it down. I said, I read it to a certain point, and when I saw that picture of Joseph Kellogg, I felt like, wow. and I read a little bit more, and Patrick did a good job of describing the climate. And he said that, as the term betting the farm, it had a lot to do with sharecropping. It had to do with the fact that each season you were putting everything you had in order to continue, and you may lose the farm. Well, with that, he said that banks would partner more with black sharecroppers versus white sharecroppers because they knew if there was ever a dispute, they would win, which created tension, a lot of tension between the poor blacks, poor whites. So I thought, wow. And that, to me, kind of tied to current time. Some kind of way, I just didn't pick the book up anymore. But I've read it, I've listened to it like 6 times, but it has some moments. And that piece that I played to start with was almost like a high. It was a low and a high. To think about an ancestor or a woman in general to be beat like that. That's brutal. And then to hear that the accumulation of property in those times was like, wow. And so I'll say it right now because it just sticks. So as we were talking through we did a lot preparing for this day. I text Patrick, he got back to me. I sent him kind of a couple pictures of what we're working on. He said, this is awesome. He started talking to me about his research. And the things he shared with you about the mapping and whatnot, he was just saying, this is what I noticed, this is what I found out, and I deflected. I just changed the subject. I said, hey, you ever been to Iowa? I mean, I could read the text to you, and I actually really, because I can't wrap my brain around that. To me, I just can't. I won't allow myself to wrap my brain. I want to stay in the moment of knowing, wow, there was someone that looked like me.
Thank you. So Patrick, I guess I'm interested, I know you kind of talked about the hate mail that you've gotten, but what has been the overall response from book readers, obviously individuals from Forsyth or the South, but most importantly from descendants who you've named in the book?
Yeah, the reaction from Forsyth County, my very first event, one of my first events in Georgia was at the Cumming Methodist Church. And it was a big crowd, and a lot of people came out. And after I finished, the first question came from the head of the local County History Society. And she basically had come to say, this is all untrue, this is made up, he's lying, and then stormed out, and it took her a long time to walk down the aisle. So we all just sat there watching her in slow motion stomp out of the church, So that was my first feedback from home. But the place has changed a great deal. So there are people who moved there with no knowledge of any of this history. I mean, the erasure, one of the subjects I was interested in addition to what happened, was the process of willful forgetting. How do they wipe this out of mind? I mean, they really did. There are people who heard the story from eyewitnesses, right? It's not that long ago, and yet they managed to just completely and totally wipe it out of mind. It's not in any of the histories of the county. There are Confederate generals all over that historical society. One of the things they were mad about is that I called out the fact that they've just buried all of this history. So there are people who are angry that it's out. There are people who are convinced that the way to heal is to shut up about it. And then there are others who seem to feel grateful. As far as the descendant families, like Japannah's, I have a very complicated set of emotions around that. I do not want to be the bearer of this bad news, but at the same time, and I understand that it's painful, and that it's different for when you told me, Japannah, that you had stopped reading. I understood that completely. And I've talked to other a lot of the descendant families I interviewed, I would sometimes go to great lengths to get on the phone or sometimes get on an airplane to go talk with somebody, and they would say, yeah, my daddy never talked about that. We never talked about it. I mean, I heard that a lot. So I get that is also a coping mechanism and a reaction. So I feel kind of torn because the truth is, at moments, I had to admit to myself that there were things in the book that are well known to African Americans, and that was, the descendant families were certainly on my mind and part of the audience, but there are other things in there where I was talking to white America. I can't lie, that some of it was, there were people who learned about the lynching epidemic from my book in 2016, and I would often say, I think that's a you problem, not a me. If you're learning about this now, I'm sorry if it pained you, but that's kind of remedial knowledge in the 21st century. So there's no single reaction from descendant families. I have mostly, I've been to a fair number of family reunions, which I take as a good sign, and lots of good food. And that's heartening to be able to get, especially for their families who wanted to give it to the next generation. And that was one of my goals, was to say, whatever anybody says, I got 35 pages of footnotes at the back. I left a trail of crumbs to all my sources. Like, you could put it on a shelf. Whatever anybody else wants to say, I wanted them to be able to put it on a shelf for the next generation.
So in addition to kind of that lost history, I guess, what else would you say that that kind of has been lost during this period of lawlessness and lives being lost? And you kind of showed us the map and obviously the dollar amount, right, of taking land. But what do you feel this history, how does it play out today in Forsyth?
One obvious thing is the land. I mean, the stakes, the reason I showed that satellite view of the highlands at Sawney with 300 $500,000 houses is just to bring home how profound the stakes are. For me, the racial wealth gap, which grows larger every single year, is inseparable from land. I mean, you cannot earn a wage that will ever make up for what a lot of white families inherit in real estate. There is no bridging that gap without addressing land. And so, I'm a strong believer in the local and the personal as a route to the universal. When things get scaled up, I start to trust them a little less. So this was an attempt to be extremely local, and it doesn't get more personal for me than right now. I didn't know the Kelloggs when I was working on the book. I spent time trying to find them, but that I don't know exactly what we do about that. For me, it's an argument for reparations on a local, a state, or a federal level, but it doesn't get more personal than that was Joseph and Eliza's farm, which they were forced to sell for $2,400, and that's just the fact. That's the amount of wealth it has generated, and that's white suburban wealth, almost across the board. And you can take that as an example of what happened in communities all over the country. Forsyth is not the only case of this, obviously. The other thing that I think was lost is the heroism. I feel like I gained something to be proud about my home place when I learned about Joseph and Eliza. So I felt like I had been deprived of some of the true heroes and a reason to feel connected and a reason, to be proud of some of what happened there. So the heroism and the resilience of that community, I didn't want to just tell about the tragedy. That community's vibrancy and their perseverance in such a place was really kind of truly heroic to me.
Okay, so aside from the dollar amount situation, you have been involved in racial justice efforts for many years. So how do you believe learning about Forsyth and this part of your history can help you kind of move forward as an advocate and even as the director of the ISCORE ISCORE project?
It's almost in reverse, because I think in my role and who I am, I think that I've always provided space for others. This is a testament. I see people that I've seen come every other year. Every year it's like, we got a date. It's first Friday in March. So I think I've done that work. And the reason I said at the beginning, I said this next part is going to be about me. And so if the work I've done doesn't matter, then so be it. But I think that this one, I got to do this one just different. And I think that gives me more purpose and direction. So I'm not done, but I think just what I feel like I've gained. It was really tough, because I thought, these are the people I work with. But I think about each year with the students, and we've been fortunate because the formula that I have, I just actively listen, and people have stories. So I just say, hey, what do you think about this? And it's, I said, just think about it. And we've had some awesome keynotes. The morning one is the one I love because you have Iowa State ties. But how you got here is unique. Dean from Design, he's on my only two-time keynote, but I've heard his story and I see him as a close friend. But when I come here, I see a lot of familiar faces. So I think that I've hopefully done some work, but I have to make a commitment, to me. It was important for me for this not to be about me. I'm not the only Kellogg. And I feel through Patrick, I'm gonna learn the Edmund Kellogg's there in Illinois, and I plan to make a trip to Forsyth at some point in time. Not after dark, but at some point in time. And then really find out where, it's a great map. So I have to thank you for writing the book, but I have to be selfish on this one and say that my body of work speaks for itself. And I don't mean that in any arrogant way. I just know I've given what I have, and hopefully that's been enough.
Thank you. So for both of you, how do you hope this book will contribute to the ongoing conversation about race and racism and even social justice in the United States?
Can I go first?
Sure.
I'll say that because I want to go first because when I got the book, like I said, I started it. I got it like 2 or 3 years ago or whatever. I started it, put it down, talked about it. And then when I started thinking about Patrick and I had to talk about the phone call. So my dad told me to call my aunt. I called. She said, oh, yeah, here's his number. So I called, and we had a conversation. And when I got off the phone, I said, wow, he seemed genuinely appreciative to be talking to Descendant. And so when I kind of reached out to him, I sent him a video about ISCORE, kind of said, save the date. I got to bring it back to committee, see what they think. And his response was even more connecting. He said, yeah, I told my wife that I just had an amazing conversation with a person that 15 minutes ago we were strangers. And that just felt like, okay, this is supposed to happen. And so, like I said, I'm looking forward to continuing the journey, but I also just think about it like, yeah, it's supposed to be. This is not, like I said, this is not by chance.
Yeah, it's been amazing to get to know Japannah, and I did not know with this invitation that I would be seeing all of you. It's so nice to see you, and it's just amazing to see his work and what he's built here. So you read my book, Japannah. Now I feel like I'm reading yours, and seeing the product of all that. As far as Ashley's question about what one hopes it will do, I mean, you become a writer in some ways because you like to sit in a room alone, moving words around. So I didn't anticipate, this is an unexpected destination from sitting for a long time, moving words around and obsessing over old newspapers. But I think I do have a hope. I don't know what the cure is. I don't know what the fix is. But I do have a hope that it might take away, at least in this one place, in Forsyth County, I wanted to take away some of the innocence of the white community I grew up with. There's an amazing quote, I've been quoting Baldwin the whole time here, but there's an amazing quote from James Baldwin. He said, in The Fire Next Time, he said, "It is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence that constitutes the crime." So I can't remedy what happened in 1912, and I don't know, I hope some legislative, brave legislators will help remedy what happened in terms of the money. But I felt like with my particular book nerd, library rat kind of skill set, I might be able to take away some of the innocence and say, try to deny it now. And that to me seems like a step forward. If you can, at the very least, have a rebuttal to the person who says, well, my family never owned any slaves. I worked for everything I ever got. I mean, these are the tropes I heard over and over and over. I still see them online in the comment section. So it doesn't have anything to do with me. All I ever did was work hard. But this is somebody living in one of those McMansions off the golf course, you know, in present day Forsyth, which is this very wealthy place. So I don't think some of those people are really big nonfiction readers. But you know, that was you try. Yeah.
All right, I love all the historical burns on folks. All right, so in closing, I want to thank both of you for sharing your personal experiences and obviously your work with our crowd today. If you'd like to own a copy of Patrick's book, which I highly, highly recommend, Blood at the Root, A Racial Cleansing in America, they are downstairs at the bookstore. You can also listen to it on Audible if you're like me and have very little time but long car rides. Definitely suggest that you do so. So thank you all today for listening, and I would like to invite Dr. Younger back up to the stage.
I want to say a couple things, a couple more things, but it's important. My family in Florida, it was critical. I was gonna bring my father here, and he's just at a stage of life that you all would have been entertained, but I wouldn't have been. So, but my siblings, Jerome, Tammy, Claudine, and Josie. And Josie, when I told her about it, excuse my language, she said, Japannah, I don't want to hear that shit. She meant it this way. She said, I got a whole closet full of Ancestry.com. I told you. And then she said, this white man writes this book, and then, and I said, okay. But she gave me the endorsement, and she. No. Hopefully
I think calling that an endorsement is generous.
No, but actually, I also want to have the Kellogg's that are here stand. It's my family, so my 2 daughters and my wife. And so hopefully they can understand some of my wackiness, and it was taught to me, but it's all out of the fact of trying to keep them safe. So thank you all.
So now, Dr. Younger, and I'll just plug real quick, Japannah and his father, that's me trying to wrap it up, and here comes Japannah still talking. So Dr. Younger.
Well, first of all, I just want to give a big round of applause for this panel. And I do have to get, Japannah know I mess with him all the time, so I'm not going to get this mic and not talk about him. But I just want to applaud his vulnerability. This was very, very challenging for him. He came in stumbling and, I got this idea, hear me out. And, but there was some apprehension, understandably, about sharing such a personal story with colleagues and how people would perceive it. And so I just want to commend his bravery and appreciate his vulnerability of sharing that with the group, as well as Patrick. He was so excited to connect with Patrick, and so it's always exciting when we kind of see it all come full circle. So thank you, Patrick. Plug, as they said, please go downstairs and grab that book. Before we break out for sessions this afternoon, once again, I want to give a round of applause to our amazing staff in dining. I don't know if we should have ate that much at lunch, y'all, because I feel myself dragging now, but we're so appreciative to them. The only housekeeping note I have, and I'm looking around at staff who will correct me if I'm wrong, there was one session canceled this afternoon at the 3:10 session for the MVP student experience. That has been canceled. Are there any other housekeeping notes, Japannah, April? I think we're good. Thank you again for coming. I think this was a wonderful discussion over our lunch break. I hope you all continue to have a wonderful ISCORE experience, and we'll see you back here at 4. Is that correct? 4 o'clock. All right, thank you.